गुड मॉर्निंग जिग्नेश भाई।
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Jignesh sir. सर को सुनाई नहीं दे रहा।
नहीं सर हंस रहा है तो फिर सुनाई दे रहा है।
जिग्नेश सर अनम्यूट करो।
भाग गया।
left. Oh yes, Bhavik Nandi. Unmute Bhavik.
Unmute sir, unmute sir.
Unmute.
Nandi sir, good
welcome.
morning.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
जिग्नेश सर अभी सुनाई दे रहा है? जिग्नेश सर को सुनाई नहीं दे रहा है क्या? No, he's having audio problem, I think.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Check screen sharing.
Yes, ma'am. You can start your screen share now. I've given the permission.
हाँ. Hello.
Can we start?
Can you see this?
Yes, ma'am.
Just read it.
Process, projects, and project purpose.
Yeah. Perfect.
Just try the full screen mode first.
Okay. So I just stop sharing.
Okay.
So sir will connect at 11:25, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So Taha, can we start?
Yes, sir. We can start, sir. We have already reached the 250 limit. Other
Okay.
participants can join through Facebook Live and
Okay. It's already 11:15, so we can start. So for 10 minutes, we can finish of the formalities.
yes. Palla ma'am join. Good time.
Taha, I think we should start now.
Nair sir, Aniket sir will join by
Yeah.
11:25.
Hello, Devanshi.
Yeah. So that's why I'm
We
telling
can
you.
start.
Yes, sir. Good morning, one and all present on this virtual platform for the celebration of World Architecture Day. On behalf of IIM Baroda Center, Gujarat chapter, along with Arvindbhai Patel, Institute of Environmental Design, Vallabh Vidyanagar, and College of Architecture, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Institute of Technology, I, Devanshi Sitpura, extend a very warm welcome to you all. On the occasion of the celebration of World Architecture Day, we have organized two webinars to promote aesthetic, scientific, and practical efficiency of profession, both in practice and academics. In the morning session of the event, we have a webinar by renowned architect Aniket Bhagwat, and in the evening, we have a webinar by architect Surendra, followed by a panel discussion on minimum standards of architecture education 2020 and its impact on architectural practice. I extend my warm welcome to architect Aniket Bhagwat, who, despite of his busy schedule, has agreed to grace the occasion and join the greater cause of IIA of supporting and promoting the profession of architecture. At this juncture, let us pay our respect to the nation and rise for the national anthem. Now, I request Professor Shailesh Nair, Chairman Baroda Center IIA Gujarat Chapter and Principal, College of Architecture, SVIT Vasad, to address the gathering.
All the professionals, academicians, students present in this virtual platform, very good morning to one and all. World Architecture Day is celebrated on the first Monday of October in parallel with UN World Habitat Day, for which the theme of this year is Housing for All, a Better Urban Future. In far too many of the world cities, people can't follow safe practices simply because they lack clean water and air, and even space itself. Urban policies must ensure adequate services, shelter, and recreational spaces for citizens. Urban planning, design, and architecture are critical to a better urban future for all. By choosing a different theme this year, each year, this World Architecture Day seeks to draw attention of all stakeholders, students, academicians, professionals, as well as the public, to the problem concerning to the cities and habitat. We all have gathered today to celebrate the World Architecture Day as an architect's commitment to our societies, our ecosystems, and our cities. To mark this occasion, Indian Institute of Architects Baroda Center have teamed up with College of Architecture SVIT Vasad and APID Vidyanagar to pick a series of talks and capture the major challenges and trends that are shaping the built environment around us. Also, this discourse, which all of us will be witnessing today, shall reconfigure the role of academics and practice to remind the collective responsibility for the future of human habitat. In this condition, where social media has become the modern agora of societies, we are reevaluating the base of our societies, friends of architects, a significant change as on a very special day. Indian Institute of Architects Baroda Center, along with SVIT and APID, welcome you all to this webinar. There are always ups and downs for a new start, but as Plato said, the beginning is the most important part of the work. Everything will then follow. Now I shall open this platform to our speaker and enlighten the students with their insights. It is a great honor for us to present you to one of the greatest architects working with Mother Nature, landscape architect Aniket Bhagwat. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your inspiring words. Now I request Professor Taha Padrawala to give a brief introduction of Aniket, sir.
Thank you, Devanshi. Today, when we are adapting to new realities, it also draws an insight that our take on the built environment is now different. To calibrate these thoughts and enthusiasm to our students, we have with us Professor Aniket Bhagwat. He studied architecture from SEPT University, Ahmedabad, further pursued his master's in landscape architecture from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. He is a third-generation landscape architect practicing in Ahmedabad with MS Prabhakar B. Bhagwat, a firm started by his father in 1973. Parallelly, LEAF is the research arm of PBB, which focuses on impact projects, environmental sustainability, plant materials, and outreach programs in order to strengthen its commitment and approach to the design processes. Today, on World Architecture Day, we will envisage Indian landscape and architecture through the lenses of Aniket sir's practice, a compassion for plants, and his role as a teacher. All his projects are different and unique in processes, but my favorite project is the basalt quarry project in Timba, which is now a dense forest. With this note, on behalf of IAA Baroda Center, association with APID, Vallabh Vidyanagar, College of Architecture, SVIT Vasal, would like to welcome
principal at APID. So hello, how are you? And I can see a lot of students. So it's great. It's a great way to start the week. It's a great way to celebrate this. So let me first share this desktop and see. Just can you help me with this? Wait, let's just a second.
No.
Cancel? Just a minute. No, but I have to share this. Just give me a second.
Sure, sir, sure.
Take a minute. Just a minute. Can you see the screen? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hello, can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir.
And if somewhere in the way that I lose the sound or something, please let me know. Yeah, great. Okay, so
Sure, sir.
great
Sure, sir.
morning again. Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes, thanks a lot. So, great. So I think over the last many decades, I personally have traveled, to colleges, to design forums, showing work, pretty much like, sometimes you get the feeling that it's a bit like a traveling circus that shows its tricks and its acts. And that one that comes to your town and pitches a tent and entertains people for a few moments with dazzling displays and funny acts, and then packs up and goes to another city, and then another, and then another. Today, of course, this is not possible. The circus can't travel, we can't travel. We are today in a time when the mind can travel, but the body cannot. A time when we can travel in time, in the ether of the mind, but not in the physical world. So this time actually brings a certain slowness. And the hands of the clock seem to inch achingly. I mean, you sit around on some days dying to do something different, to step out, to see places, And yet at other moments, everything is a blur and the mind darts from thought to thought and it's filled with dizzying possibilities. It's time like this that I found time to pause, to reflect, to shed some burden, and by doing so, shed some light. Today's World Architecture Day, and as was talked about, the theme for World Architecture Day is housing, and that's an important theme. That's a very, very important theme. But as architects, and particularly in the context of India, for students and young architects, I think there's something else that I have found perhaps even more important and more critical. And that really is our ability, or the lack of it, to imagine, to design, and to believe in a process. To a great extent, I think that what has happened, and one sees this around you all the time, that because of the extent of social media, because of the way that images are hammered at you all the time, a lot of the work that gets produced in the country is not dissimilar from the kind of work that is produced elsewhere in the world. And I think the syntax is pretty similar, the language is similar, the vocabulary is similar. And with each passing day, you seem to find lesser and lesser energy being put in by the architects as a profession, as a group of students, as a group of young architects, in really trying to develop our own vocabulary or trying to be sort of highly specific to what it is that we would like to say. And I think this is very, very worrying. I think it's time that architects, all of us, need to sit back and ask ourselves about the kind of work that we are producing. So while, it might be environmentally sustainable, while it might be correct for the program, while it might be built well, the question is, what language is our work talking? And is it talking a language that we are creating, or is it talking a language that we are borrowing continuously from looking at images, looking at projects elsewhere in the world, and trying to create it here without really understanding the value of process? And this is something that I'd like to sort of talk about a little bit. And I'd like to share our journey while I'm trying to explain this. So by way of introduction, of course, we are an old landscape firm, and we do a fair amount of master planning, architecture, and interior design. And we have studios in Ahmedabad and Mumbai. So between the two places, we are about 40 of us. Out of all of us, some are like rocks. I mean, we are firm, we are grounded, and we are together. Some are like the colorful shells that get tossed and danced with the waves, and finally are washed up on the shore. So the studio, like the ocean, needs them all. It needs the rocks to divert and bear the flow, waves to tell us about the rhythm of life, and in the water, the many delightful creatures that remind us of the joyousness of life. We laugh a lot in the office. We work very hard. We listen to a lot of music. But we mostly work very, very hard. So hard that many think that we are difficult people or impossible people. And working with us is not normal. I often get asked this. People ask me saying, is your place a difficult place to work? Is there not too much pressure? Why do some people last only a few months? Why do people, when they leave the office, decide that they require a long holiday before they want to take up something else? Do they get that tired? I think the answer to that is this, that not all carbon turns to coal. Not all carbon turns to diamond. Most of it crumbles under pressure, but some becomes coal, shines brightly, slowly combusts and lives on that memory of fire, and then some become diamonds, hard, brilliant, and difficult to dent. So that's the only way I can explain it, that there is a toughness that is required, there is a rigor that is required. It works for some, it doesn't work for some. But if we really have to find a diamond in our work, I don't see any other option but to, go at it every day, 10, 12 hours, relentlessly, your entire life, and just be possessed by this idea of design. And when a group comes together like that, magic happens. So magic happens across scales, day in and day out. So over the years, the studio has designed many spaces. So some projects quickly to give you a sense of the work that the studio has done. So it's designed small play spaces for children using waste material. And this is something that the studio has experimented at different places and used eucalyptus bullies, construction bullies, old packing boxes, and so on and so forth. So these sort of spaces. Or designed a park like this one in Mumbai that tells the story of the textile mills or the history of the textile mill. This park is built in Lower Parel, and the area of Lower Parel is where the old textile mills used to be. And it's almost as if a new Bombay is coming up on the grave of the textile history of Bombay. And this park pays tribute to many things that Bombay seems to have forgotten. It pays tribute to its textile mill history, or in another part of the park, it almost creates a large plaza that is like a dockyard where containers are seen from the top. And it sort of reminds Bombay of its maritime history. So the curve at the back sort of responds to the Marine Drive curve with the way that planting happened in Marine Drive in the beginning. The plaza sort of connects you to its maritime history. And these islands that you see in the front, they really talk about the 7 islands that were put together to make the city of Bombay. So this park tries to connect Bombay with its ecological, its cultural, and its historical sort of antecedents, parts that cities tend to forget. Slowly cities move on and they forget where they come from. And this park tries to tell this. Or a building like this that is built in Delhi, and it's a rebel against urbanity. So it's a building that turns itself away from the urbanity that Gurgaon is and literally refuses to look at what Gurgaon is. So the building is wrapped up in cotton steel, and it's only got thin gills, almost like the gills of the fish, that can breathe in air, can bring in a little bit of light, but the building kind of refuses to look out. And inside the building, there's a courtyard that celebrates life by doing these beautiful brick walls that are hand-cast bricks, and the brick walls bend and they sway, and all the bricks are specially cast almost like there's a stitch, like a fabric stitch that begins to happen in the building. Or simple things like this, where there were 2 mango trees and we decided to scoop the earth and build a small hut under the 2 mango trees so as to save the mango trees, but at the same time celebrate the presence of these 2 mango trees. Or at a much different scale, we build cities. So this is a city that we are building in Bombay. It's a city which will have the population of Baroda over time. It's a city built over 6,000 acres, out of which the first 1,000 acres are kind of complete. And in this, we do everything from building the roads of the city and really the pedestrian crossings, the street signage, the pedestrian environment, the traffic lines, to the street furniture, which is bus stands, to public parks of the city. This is a wetland park next to a large lake.
Prabhakar, sir.
So images. Hello?
Sir, sorry to interrupt. Your presentation is not on the screen, sir.
Oh, you can't see anything? Hello?
It went just now, sir. You can reshare
Okay, let me come back.
the screen, sir.
Yeah, let me just
Yes,
reshare it.
Taha, I think somebody else shared the screen.
Okay.
Yes, that's why I guess.
Thank you. Can you see it now? Hello?
So we are
Can you
seeing
see
the
it?
folder.
Yeah, the screen
We are
folder
seeing
has
the folder.
come. You have to open the screen. Open
I
the folder.
opened it. I opened it at my end.
Sir, the folder is viewable. You can start the presentation. We can see your desktop screen.
I think you have shared the wrong window, sir. You have to share the open presentation.
Yeah, I thought I did that. Now? Now can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I don't know when I stopped, but yeah, did you see this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. So it's a city that we are building, and in that city, of course, we look at everything from the way that bus stands happen, the public parks of the city, and this is the Khoni Wetland Park. So there are several lakh people now living in this city, or this is a sports park that sits between a sports arena and another part of the city, or the courtyard. So these are simple housing courtyards of this large sort of housing that this city presents itself. The other thing, and this is in Baroda, of course, the other thing that we also do, or we build these sort of homes that sit on the edge of wilderness. So this is a home that's in Baroda. It sits on it's in the Ravinus land, and it sits on the edge of wilderness. And there's a steel bridge that through experiments with different ideas of nature, of wild nature and tame nature. So on one side is a tame nature, but on the other side of the bridge is a wild sort of nature. And the bridge pierces the house and comes out through the house and descends back into Agri House. Or this is a building again in Baroda, which are imagined as arts. And this is the Arc building. So it was inspired by a Paul Klee painting, and it's got on the facade of the building this beautiful work done by the banyan tree on the exposed concrete face of the building. And the central atrium is this tribute to Paul Klee and his painting of uncomposed objects in space that really are suspended objects, as if there is tension, but there is great calmness in that tension. And of course, the basements, which are the parking basements, are surreal spaces. So while they're used for parking, they're also used for exhibitions, they're used for music concerts, they're used for many talks, and so on and so forth. Or landscapes like this that resemble land art. This entire landscape is on a 3-level podium parking. And at the lower area is the working space on the top. On the left-hand side is the residential sort of space. And this is all built on slabs, but it's almost like land art. It is almost designed, almost like a painting. There's a graphic quality to these sort of landscapes. Or of course, you know, the example that Professor Padrawala mentioned, which is devastated lands like this. This is Timber, which my father worked on, at a large devastated land like this, which after tapping the water and working with the soil for about 7-8 years, changed itself into a forest of this kind. Or offices like this in Bombay. So these are a series of office spaces that we've done in Bombay, which really has got very, very little space. But yet in all those spaces, the idea is to find a certain amount of poetics, a certain amount of beauty in every little corner that is possible, so that people can enjoy the idea of nature a little bit. This is on the terrace of the building. In another point is this entire sculptural sort of tree that is created and creates a tree line that runs along the entire driveway. And it's just on about 40 centimeters on the edge of the driveway. So you take whatever few opportunities that you have, and you convey these opportunities as well as you can. Or in this case, on the terrace next to a cafe to tell the story of the boulders of the Western Ghat and the lost trees of the Western Ghats. So each of this boulder has got one lost tree that now we don't see anymore at the Western Ghat. Or even spaces like this. So this is the kind of space that is actually used for the machines to move to be able to clean the facade of the building. But even in spaces like this, the idea of etching the skyline of Bombay, so that even when you see it, there's something that continuously reminds you about the idea of landscape, about the idea of nature, and about the idea of urbanity. Or pharmaceuticals. So these are very large pharmaceutical projects. This one is in Dahej, where the office is done, the landscape and the architecture and the interior and the master planning. But despite being a pharmaceutical project, it has a certain kind of strong identity that it starts creating. This is the entire entrance sequence of how people come to work every day. In the center of this place is a prayer space, which is the geographic center. And that's a place where everybody comes in the morning and sits and stands in silence for a few minutes before they go to work. And the two existing banyan trees are sort of woven into this composition. Or even places where there's planting between the factories, there is continuously a search for a certain beauty, a certain sense of graphicness that one tries to do. And another pharmaceutical plant, this one in Ahmedabad, the entire project was divided as a set of valleys and mountains. And it was done so that all the water that ran on this 100-acre site was trapped in this valley and brought down and recharged the ground. So it was very functional sort of landscape, but at the same time, it presented itself as a very bold sort of landscape of valleys and hills, where all the water runs down the valleys and then is recharged. And as a confidence of our bioengineering sort of thinking, the office building, which you can see on the top, is built on the lowest contour. And it has water that runs through the office building. And then again, to go back to Ark, and it could be the interiors of the Ark. And the interiors of the Ark really referred back, for example, to the idea of Noah's Ark and all that is precious, and sort of started creating a story beginning from the Noah's Ark. And it worked with using tribal painters who came and drew their version, a Goan painter who drew his version of what the Noah's Ark is. And you can see all the animals lined up. On the other face, you can see a boat, which is a story of the Noah's boat and how the animals are all taken for rescue. But the entire space presents itself almost like an art gallery within which people sort of sit and work. But it's all customized, so it doesn't matter how big the project is or how small the project is. These are lamps, all hand-woven lamps, where they tell the story of animals, or the tables, where the feet of the tables are reminiscent of the hoofs or the strange legs of many, many different kinds of animals. So it continues that story even in the interiors. Or projects like this, which is like the drum house, where there's a beautiful exposed concrete sheet that wraps up the house and the handmade bricks that create the drum. And this is almost like fabric. The casting is almost as delicate as fabric. And it's beyond that you go inside and you find this hand-done drum with bricks. As you can see, as you go higher, the bricks become thinner. At the bottom, the bricks are a little sort of thicker. Or it could also be things like this. This is in Bangalore. This is an old industrial district for Bosch, and it's being reimagined as a workplace. And in that reimagination of the workplace, how do you really think about how should people work, play, eat, socialize? What do you start creating as ways of overlapping for them? And how do you then start creating within the landscape places where people can go out and work and meet each other and be as much as possible in the outdoor? Or this is a project that is for one of India's largest corporate houses. This is for Torrent. Unlike corporate landscapes, this landscape is about empathy. It's about nature. It's about giving back. So there's a water body, and in the water body there are these islands which human beings can't go to. Only birds can go to these islands. And over a period of time, these islands have started becoming the destination or the home for many migratory birds that come and choose to stay there. Or in another part of the project, on the right-hand side is almost a museum of lost trees. Or in some projects, we actually grow food, which is used in the kitchen, in the project. Or on the podium, which is very thin, we almost start creating a sort of grassland that gets created. So the project really talks about many values. It talks about creating grasslands, wild landscapes. It creates a museum of lost trees. It talks about growing food. It talks about creating a landscape really for biodiversity and not for human beings. And this is a corporate landscape. And I think it also starts telling us about how we should start looking at the way that we look at values of living, values of habitation. What kind of values as designers should we be able to sort of present to the world when we start designing things? What is the kind of conversation that we should engage the world in? Or this, of course, is a small project that we did where we worked with the children in a school in Delhi and sort of developed the landscape along with the children through a series of workshops. And they created that scarecrow, or even the gate was a very playful sort of gate. And really, in this case, the only area available was the margin of the building site. So really a 4 meter, 5 meter strip that ran along the length of the building. The point really is that nothing is too small to be able to write a small haiku. Nothing is too small to write a small poetry. Every opportunity is something that you can take and seize and do something quite beautiful with that possibility of that opportunity. So the walls are sort of these blackboard walls that children paint, the wild grasses. Or here is another school that we built in Ahmedabad, where we built this school out of compressed earth and cast earth. So the building is built essentially with sustainable sort of materials, and it's imagined as a small village. It's imagined as a small village where many children sort of come together and stay, and then individual homes, sometimes connected with bridges, but all done in extremely humble and simple sort of materials. Or something as playful as something like this, where in the middle of a housing development, we built this giant dinosaurus, which really is a great fun thing for children to come and play. And then this one is a wedding place in Ahmedabad, which is large. It can accommodate about 1,000 people, 3,000, 4,000 people. And for the lighting of that wedding place, we earlier had the whole lighting done up as a set of moons, and then we changed it about 5 years back. And now the entire lighting of this football-sized wedding venue is done as stars and sort of bright clouds, and it changes, and the lighting changes. So earlier it started with something like this, which were moons on a truss, but in the night, all you really saw were just the moons. And then after about 10, 12 years, we changed that lighting to make it the lighting of clouds and stars, so that sometimes it's only the clouds that sort of light up in the sky, and sometimes it's the stars. Or projects like this, where in an old fort in Rajasthan, we sort of built very, very complex mental scapes, so mental stories, and told stories about royalty, told stories of how women are treated in feudal lands, or reimagined things like this, which is the Kamal Court, and reimagined the lotus as a more contemporary sort of expression of the idea of the flower. Or at some other parts of the project, use the old four-square garden principles of gravity-fed irrigation to create this place to grow sort of vegetables. Or work with, on the other hand, with extremely large project. This is 6,000 acres in the middle of Western Ghats, and really did one of the most complex environmental submissions in the country that really tried to demonstrate that development and nature are not always antithetical. They can coexist, they can work together, but we have to be very, very careful about understanding how we start occupying places like this. Or very simple projects like this. This one is really a drain in the center And on the right-hand side is the factory entrance. On the left-hand side was the new office. And the only scope that we had was the width of the drain. And even on the width of the drain, to really do this sort of sculptural installation that separates the two worlds and yet allows some kind of connection. This is something that one of your alumni has worked with. I don't know whether she's teaching now, but this is something that was part of the fellowship of LEAF. And so we have an organization called LEAF, which really focuses on research and communication and publication. It gives out fellowships every year. So last year or the year before, fellowship went to, on the left-hand side, to Dhara and Parita from your college. On the right-hand side, the fellowship had gone to Rushika. So Dhara, Nishant, and Parita, and Rushika on the right. And what they worked on, what Outgrow worked on, is just trying to find out ways in which wild planting or wild plants can start becoming part of a garden. And they took a little place near Anand and worked on that place for a year, just experimenting with various wild plants, wild seeds, and see how they grew, see how they started mixing up. And now we slowly are beginning to find ways in which wild planting or natural planting can start becoming part of our habitable spaces. Or in this case, Rushika's work that really talked about wilderness. So while we talk about wilderness from an ecological perspective, we very rarely talk about wilderness from a spatial or an emotive perspective. How does one design wilderness? How does one encourage wilderness in one's project? And this book and this research really helps classifying this quite wonderfully, and these books are now out. So the office spends a lot of time investing in this sort of work. Where does it come from? It comes from, I think, a fundamental belief that being a professional is not only about doing projects. Being a professional really is about finding every possible way that is available to you to explore and to expand your understanding of the profession. This is something that we are now working on, and we are working on a plant app, which is really for designers, which will help designers make choices of planting plants or plant material based on morphological characteristics. And it's an app that we've developed, which hopefully we want to crowdsource it so that it's available for plant material across the entire country. What I'm now going to spend a little time then is to tell you how does all this happen. I mean, quite so often people turn around and say, so sometimes people don't understand the effort that goes behind creating projects like this. They think it comes easy, or you think, sometimes people think that you're lucky. You're lucky that your projects turn out well, or you're lucky that clients are good to you, or people think that actually you're very good at designing. But the fact of the matter is that we are like everybody else. We are ordinary, or we are good, like everybody else is ordinary and everybody else is good. But what we do is tremendous amount of effort that we put in when we start developing an idea, and we don't rest till we've really developed it as much as we can. So a recent project, so a year back we were invited to do a project which we were very excited about. It's a large land next to a scrub land, and we were asked to imagine this place as a weekend place for a family. So we started working on it, and now the project has gone into execution. But we enjoyed the design process so much that we decided to compile it as a design handbook. And now this book is also available. And why is this book done? Well, we truly believe that the idea of process, the simple idea of process, is something that we seem to have forgotten now as architects. We are in a hurry. Our ideas of process are short-circuited. We don't invest enough time in wandering in the mind. We want to reach somewhere very quickly. So I think this book is good for us in the office, because it's a good reminder for us and we can refer to it on and on. But it's also for students of architecture and folks like you, folks like me, people in the office, people who can learn every day about what does architecture really stand for? What is this whole idea of process and design? And in making this compendium, we wrote something right at the beginning, and we said, why process? And I'd like you to take a minute to read this, and I will read it along with you. So I said, why process? So all designs have processes, we know that. What differs is their aspiration. At the very minimum, and this is important, at the very minimum, a process takes on as its parameters the task of responding to simple ideas of usable space or cost or constructability or addressing local laws. Or it can add to it layers of the user's literal and then perhaps spiritual aspirations. But to me, this is the minimum. I mean, this is the minimum that one has to achieve. This is like telling a structural engineer that, you know, your objective has to be that the building has to stand. So that's the minimum. But the processes that matter and are engaging, take all this as bare minimum. Then they add and hence examine ideas of life and culture. They strive to find ways of developing conversation that engage the individual, but at the same time hope to engage with history and our changing notions of life. Good processes work with many notions of time, the immediate and the archaeological, the past, the present, and the future. What does that mean? That when you do a good project, we all strive for a project to be timeless. I mean, that is, you know, only if you're lucky, once in a millennium will a project like that get created. But I think what we also must struggle with is to say that the project that we've done can do different conversations at different times. It is not so present today and so topical today that after 5 years, it won't have the ability to do the conversation. Projects must create the possibility of creating conversations all the time. And I think that is, when that happens, I think the project turns out fine. So constructed spatiality is a timeless device. So when you build something, you have to think of something that you build or create or design, almost like a timeless device. It's a device which, while enabling and celebrating many ideas of occupation, if embedded with silent conversations of the many diverse ideas of life and culture, become potent devices of soliloquy and calibration. If you can do that, these are places where you can talk with yourself. These are places where you can calibrate yourself. Good spaces allow you to do that. They allow you to have conversations with yourself. And that is what I think we should all strive for. And the other thing that we wrote is also about process. So why process, but about process. So something that in this, you know, it's known well to practitioners, but often something that surprises young students is that design is never a linear process. There are times when one starts with the end and others in the middle, yet others oscillate between the intended phases, almost hoping that the creation of compressions and rarefactions leads to certain revelation that will help guide design. So design is never linear. It is not, I do this today, then I'll do this tomorrow, and I'll do this day after. No, it's never like that. It's many things all happening at the same time. So to give an example, in wartime codes, and equally in the early days of the World Wide Web, it was strings of information were sent out through many different ways. Some of them got lost along the way. Some of them got corrupted. The system, however, had the ability to string all information together and reach the intended in a cohesive form. So in design, a certain set of aspirational ideas are set afloat. And in their journey, some lose, some sink, some get broken, some are changed, but yet others soar. And in the end, they arrive as one entity. So the part of the design process is to ensure that their journey, often it takes years, but their sense of purpose is not diluted or it's not corrupted. And with every year and every passing moment, they aspire and become better and better ideas of life. So there is no question of being disheartened about design. Design is, well, a process is a process. And so long as you believe in it, and so long as you sort of keep plugging at it and invest your heart and soul into it, good things will happen. It doesn't matter if it doesn't happen in the time that you've given yourself. So design is like a well-honed, gifted classical dancer whose every gesture is coordinated, has meaning, and fills our minds with awe, hope, and introduces us to the many wonders of love, of life. Or it is a pretender who gesticulates limbs wildly, hoping to pass off as a dancer, and that certainly is not design. And you see a lot of buildings like that today who, really are doing gymnastics. And in their gymnastics, yes, they are sort of catching some attention, but that's not design. Design is well honed, it's precise, it's rehearsed, it's coordinated, and it's got meanings. And I think it's good to remember that. So I'm going to run through this very quickly. This book sort of maps everything that happened in the project from day one. So the first thing that we did in the project was we actually drew a drawing of how we reached the site. So, on the left-hand side, you can see the city. On the right-hand side, you can see the site. And you can begin to see the time that it took and the experience and how the city gets left behind and how sort of things change so that as you come closer and closer, how the sky starts meeting the ground. I mean, the horizon starts expressing itself very, very, very differently. So this was the site. We had this wonderful deer. We still do on the site. And we started mapping the soil. So, and if you have some time, you should read what is written below, because I've written it very carefully. I'll read one, but when it comes to the other ones, you can choose how to read it. A new site is like a new acquaintance, and you want to befriend. That quest, however, needs to be tempered. So when you make a new friend, you want to make friends, but you have to be careful that you're not so excited that the friend runs away or gets scared by your excitement. So it has to be tempered. An overtly active effort can be intrusive and cloaked with myopia, the essential nature of it. Entering new relationships, like falling in love, also requires a certain exuberance, a certain anticipation. Tired eyes and closed minds help very little. A preconceived notion of how the relationship will mature is fraught with problems. Each one needs a fresh way of approaching. Very often, you will hear people say, "Oh, that site, we have done a site like this before. That site, it is like that site." The moment you start talking like this, your eyes are tired, your mind is tired, and you have to find out ways of invigorating, exciting it every time you're confronted with something new. So these are some of the drawings that we did for the site. I mean, the one on the top left is just how soil texture is at the site. The one below is just the way grasses and wild grasses grow at the site, or just the sound of bird or animals, or the sound of birds at the site, or just the other sound, the crackling of leaves, the sound of aquatic birds, the sound of vehicles. You can well ask whether something like this helps, and you can well say, when you finally designed this, how did it help? And I think this connection is not a direct connection. This connection is a bit like Riyaz. It's a bit like, imagining the world slowly and assimilating it. And the more you assimilate it, the more you assimilate the site, when you sit to design, there are these layers of assimilation that have already built in your mind that start creating the idea of design. One of the first, so again here, invoking emotions, laying bare their vulnerability and meaning. So one of the first presentations that we do to the client is where we are almost naked. We show the client things, or we show the client things, or our best dreams. And sometimes, of course, there is the fear that somebody will turn around and say, "But that's not what we wanted," or "Are you okay?" But to being naked, to display unabashedly, it invites comment. It invites either a wholehearted acceptance or equally a rejection. But through that, it starts becoming a sort of sieve through which you can begin to understand how we should all work together on the project. So one of the first presentations we did on this project were really paintings like this, and we said, what if this place was a place like this, where you could sit next to water, or you could walk through fields, or you could sit at a higher place and look at the night sky, or birds returning home. And then, of course, after those discussions, we sort of, typically in the office, when something exciting happens, 5, 6, 7 people start working on it simultaneously. So these are a whole bunch of trainees who are working in the office at that point of time. And they were all beginning to imagine the site plan, or the way of siting, or what is the idea of water, how does one move, where do you build, what are the open spaces, and so on and so forth. So many sort of options. And similarly, many thinkings of without even knowing what kind of buildings we were going to design, but to say, what kind of architecture are we looking at? How should it occupy the sky? How should it look at the idea of a court? And we start making these sort of drawings and these imaginations. And then finally, we sort of put together one presentation, which really was, the site and a built in the middle, a large pond, agriculture, ways to move, some of the other sort of structures at the site. And we presented this to the client. And the client, of course, thought that, yes, we had worked a lot, but didn't want something like this, didn't want something built as one central object in the project, but wanted a very sort of light built footprint and wanted it distributed at many places across the site. So then we go back and we start organizing the site. And while you're doing that, you have to realize that when you organize sites, it's like relationships of many threads. So relations are like a tenuous web of threads. Some are strong, some are fragile, and some are waiting to be expansive, and yet abstract mapping of possibilities allows their meanings to be examined. So when you organize sites, it's continuously you're balancing many, many things when you're beginning to do it. And slowly a site plan sort of begins to emerge. And then simultaneously, we started drawing different ideas of the villas. So earlier, they were meant to be 4 villas. And we did models, we did sketches, we drew it up a little better, we did more sketches, we did similarly something for the other villa. And for each one of them, we were determined that when we designed it, it should not look as if it was coming out of one architectural office. It had to all have exuberance, a certain sense of spatiality, but a certain sense of freshness, not as if one language was decided and then that language was repeated across the project. So another sort of villa, this one a little different about how it responds to the water, how it sort of gets garden courts next to the bedroom. We started doing some sketches for it. And another villa, again, models for it, sketches for it, and another villa. So this went on, and after we did this sort of presentation, we also started imagining that we wanted to build a public pavilion. So we did a lot of work on the public pavilion, imagined its construction, this is some of the early models. Then it became a very simple sort of architecture. And then a model started arriving at the site. So you can begin to see the center, which really is the lake, the 4 villas, and the public pavilion somewhere along the side. At that point of time, I think the client realized that there was just too much building. And we decided to eliminate 2 of the villas and add an additional bedroom. So it finally became a project with 2 villas and the public pavilion. So we went back to sort of making the site plan as many, many sketches as you can begin to see, and went back to designing the villas. And we took 2 of the villas that we liked the most and started drawing its architecture and imagining very earlier on its surface modulation and its articulation and some ideas of materiality, started doing volumetric models and started drawing up plans and doing detailed models. And similarly, this became 1 villa. There was a courtyard garden in the center. It looked at the water on the other side. And we drew the other villa. And the other villa really worked with the idea of thickness and thinness of walls. And we sort of started, we wanted it to feel almost sculpted, almost as if it was done with clay. And so started imagining it. And as you can see on the left, some early sketches started imagining that character. We also started imagining its sort of colors and how it would present itself in the sky. And then drew the walls a little more carefully each day and started building the models for it. And slowly that plan as a fragment of walls that are thick and thin and sculpted and carved started imagining and started coming through. And finally sort of the models started getting done. And then we had to sort of go back to the public pavilion. We had designed it. We wanted to do it in brick walls. So we did a series of studies of brick walls of proportions, heights, spanning, sense of space, and started imagining it. And finally, we realized that a brick wall of this kind from structural codes is something that is not possible to do because we don't have the structural codes still available to be able to design and do an audit of something of this kind. And just for that reason, despite knowing that we could have built it, just for that reason, we sort of gave up after doing a lot of work on imagining the public pavilion and went back to the public pavilion and started doing a series of sketches on the public pavilion and imagining the roof. And we started imagining it almost as a tented city, a tented camp that sat at the edge of water. The roof really started becoming reminiscent of the idea of tents. And there were a lot of studies of different ways in which the roof can be imagined. And some of the early plans that started imagining the lake, the deck, the living spaces, the pool, the entrance garden, and the other sort of support utilities at the back. We started doing models in the office and kept on studying the way the roof would present itself from inside and from the external. Or what kind of hole would it puncture in the roof, and how would that hole be read? Would it be read as a fabric? Would it be read as almost a vortex? So what are the different ways in which it could be read? Then other parts started getting designed. So there was a theater, an amphitheater that we were building, and models started getting done for the amphitheater with its support spaces. We decided that all areas, and there were 4 of them, would actually get designed almost like small hamlets, as small sort of clusters in the village and not like conventional staff areas. So the design for that, for all of them, started happening separately. A temple, this family only puts oil on a rock every day, and that's the extent of the way that they pray. And how do you take a simple act like that and still sort of make it special? So we decided to build a temple which was wrapped up with a hedge. So this box was a hedge box, and we build something in brick in which that rock was put. But again, the idea of the light vortex, the idea of proportions, the idea of the way the shadows would start getting cast for different diameters at different times of the day. And slowly the temple and its sort of architecture started emerging. We started doing models for it. We started drawing up the entrances. So really every part of the project, I mean, there were decks, there were bridges, everything got drawn as 4 or 5 variations, tested, tried, models were made. This is for the bridge and models for the bridge. And then finally the master plan models started appearing. The public spaces occurred here, one of the villa here, another villa there, the staff areas sort of here, the amphitheater that looked at the water somewhere here, the cropland, the farms were here, the orchards were all around, and the lake sort of went, the wetland went and sort of held all the spaces, and you entered from here, you sort of turned around. And then along with that, we started working with the idea of landscape. So we said, what kind of landscape? So we started drawing things about the story of light and shade, or the story of the color, or the story of just different gardens and the mood that they would have, or the story of the orchards. We started saying, where is the cover of the tree? What happens when the land needs water? Where is the grass wild? Where are the trails cut through the grass so that you can go sort of discovering the landscape? And so gradually that started getting built up as to which were the grasslands, which were the denser grasslands, where did the trees happen, where did the shrubs happen, and all that started getting modeled slowly. And then finally, sort of the master plan appeared. And as you can see here, that's the public pavilion. That's one of the villas. That's the other villa, the amphitheater, the water that looks, the planting that is kind of wild, the fields that are here. There's a play space. There's a succulent and a cacti garden. And there's a place for an outdoor sort of environmental sculpture that you see when you start coming in. So it really, I mean, when you start looking at the build program, it's not such a big build program. There are 2 small villas, which are 7, 8, 9,000 square feet. There's a public pavilion, which is 10, 12,000 square feet. And of course, there's a large landscape, which is about 20 acres. But it took us a little over a year to be able to finally be convinced that this is what we wanted to build. And this is how we wanted to start executing. The project just started getting executed in last November, of course. it slowed down because of COVID. It's picked up pace again. But we've been designing for a year, a little over a year. By the time in November, close to about 27 or 30 different people had worked on it and bits and pieces. So there's no reason to believe that, these things are the creation of one mind or two architects. It's a collaborative creation where many people start helping. And that's how this place will begin to sort of look at. So the driveway that will lead on the right-hand side, you can see a silhouette of that bridge. The amphitheater that sits at the edge of the water. The temple that you can see in the left with the hedge court and the bridge that leads it around. The court of the temple. The public pavilion with these roofs, which we still don't know what we're going to finish them with. We have just sort of agreed on its construction, but we are to do it in wood or to do it in ceramic, but we are not sure. But the way that the public pavilion sits, the deck, the inside of the public pavilion, which is done in steel, one of the vortex of that sort of space in the public pavilion, the view from it, other parts of the project, one of the villas. And as you can see, from its materiality, from its architectural syntax, they're all very different. I mean, there are 3 different characters, or including the temple, 4 different characters that will come to this site. All of them come with different materials, different architectural vocabularies, different ways of looking at fire breaks and corbelling. And sits at the edge of water. And this is the other villa, the one which I talked about, the thick walls. And that's the entire plan. So at the end of this entire thing, we wrote a small conclusion, and I'd like to sort of read that and end with that for this talk. So, I said the purpose of the process is no different than Ibn Battuta, that insatiable traveler, who said traveling, it leaves you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller. So it really is this. It is to find meanings. Examine carefully the constructs that shape us. Imagine different ways to allow readings of life. And in that journey, leave stories embedded in the works that will speak differently to different people long after the designers and the users of the space have ceased to be. The legacy for posterity can be large and tall monoliths, and we see that in our country today, unfortunately. But perhaps more meaningfully, can be tales embedded in spaces that speak insistently to those who wish to hear and draw those who seem distant. So this book is now out, so why does it matter? So what may come across from this explanation of a partial process of a project is perhaps compelling passion, a deep desire to start conversations with time and forces that we cannot map or fathom. A charitable observation may well allow that we as a studio seem to be deeply engaged in whatever we do, and we seem to do it day in and day out, year in, year out for decades. I often ask, and amongst ourselves we often discuss this honestly, and we say, why is it so? What drives us? And it's really a simple answer. Loving and learning, that's what drives us. The love for it and the desire to learn. A love for our desire, for our discipline, and the desire to learn each day. The rest is really a byproduct. The projects we do, happy clients, sometimes some accolades, sometimes some fame, the money we earn, it's just a byproduct of 2 emotions, love and learning. Sometimes people say that they are in the profession because they want to change the world, or they want to sort of do something for the public, or save the environment, or to them we say that is a byproduct. If you don't love your discipline, you won't be able to do anything. In fact, you won't be able to do anything at all. So love and a hunger to learn each moment is a base qualification. If you don't have it, you need to find it. If you can't find it, you must try harder. And despite your best effort, if you can't, then you must change the profession, because this profession is about love. It's about love for what we do and the desire to learn every day. So does that worry some of you who may not be in love or who may not be as passionate about the world? It should. And you should do something about it very fast. You're all young, some of you. And while there are many things that you may have to learn, finding love is not one of them. You have to go and find love. And that's all I have for today. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening section. Now I request Taha sir to address the questions of the participants for the interaction with Aniket sir.
Okay, I can see a few questions in the chat box. One is from the Jayashree Mishra. What is your philosophy of integrating landscape as a part of material?
What is your philosophy about landscape integrating as a part of material?
I just read it again, sir. What is your philosophy of integrating landscape as a part of material?
Not very clear about what that question is, but if somebody could explain that, could you, whoever asked it, could she explain it a little?
Jayashree, you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly. Jayashree, are you there?
Yes. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I wanted to ask that I have seen a lot of projects which you have a landscape, and the landscape somewhere somehow it is related to the material that you have adopted in your building and the spaces that you have generated. Either it is a public space or it is a built space. So just to understand that there must be a philosophy in your mind or in your working style, that how do you really integrate these two things? Because when we talk about material, then it has to be the part of that landscape and vice versa. So yeah, so that's how my question is.
Let me try and answer this a little differently, right?
I asked, what is your process and what is your approach?
So let me try and understand this question and answer it a little differently. So I come from the belief that whether it's architecture, whether it's landscape, or whether it's interior design, I think all of them are extremely strong disciplines. And they're strong disciplines independent of each other. So in some sense, they have a lot to do with each other, but not one of them is not subservient to the other. They're all individual characters. And so long as they have the ability of having a conversation together, it doesn't matter if they do different kinds of doing conversations. But the important thing is that they must have the ability of doing conversation. That's the only requirement. So if you take that and sort of take that and talk about it in terms of materials, then because a certain kind of material is used in the architecture, doesn't mean that the similar kind of material needs to be used in the landscape. Or because a certain kind of material is used in the architecture, doesn't mean that that material has to be used in the interiors. It's about how you do that conversation. So long as there is a certain degree of empathy, so long as there's a certain degree of give and take, it could be very, very different. I think, so the philosophy is to find ways in which conversations can be structured in space, either by the way that you partially construct the space or by the manner in which you sort of juxtapose materials. So again, very clearly, we come from not a very classic way of looking at architecture. So the classic way of looking at architecture is that once you've decided a material, you sort of see that material being exposed or done throughout the project. So if you got brick, then the entire project sort of runs through with brick. We don't believe in that. I mean, we believe a project can have any number of materials if it needs to, if it needs to communicate something differently. So we see really materials as words. We see them as the making of language. And once you think of it like that, then you don't really sort of curtail yourself to a small vocabulary. You say the entire dictionary is available to you, and you can make sentences the way you want to make sentences. I know it's not a direct answer, but that's the way that I look at it.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
There is another question by Pallavi Mahida ma'am. What are your views on large garbage dump yards in urban centers? How do you wish to deal with them in form regeneration and landscape point of view?
No, so I think, Pallavi, I think it's quite clear. I mean, cities cannot have large garbage dumps. I mean, there is no two ways about it. And it's unfortunate if we do, right? Garbage dump management or landfill management is an adequately sort of developed science anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, here, we still seem to think that we can make mountains of garbage and then scratch our head and wonder what to do. But that's not right. I mean, anywhere in the world, you will line it first. You will make sure that the chemicals don't seep in the ground. You will create layers on a regular basis so that the methane gases are allowed to be released. You will plant on a regular basis. You make sure that when they leach in a certain manner, and you will convert what you can into electricity or into manure. So I don't think that garbage dumps have any place in our lives. The moment they reach a certain point, one needs to have a plan to convert them into a landfill site, whether it's a forest, whether it's, whatever, is depending on the compaction, depending on the methane gases, depending on how it is done. There are examples in the country. So, I mean, there are a few examples in the country, not too many. The one in Bombay is a garbage dump and is now converted into quite a nice quite a nice park. But in general, I think we are not scientific. I think we are careless. And in LEAF, for example, through LEAF, we've done a document on the Pirana waste dump in Ahmedabad. And while we sort of document the horror of the Pirana waste dump, we also try and make a comment on what does it mean for the lives of the people living around. I mean, these people who live around are exposed to a certain disease all the time. Their healths are shot. So, I mean, it's sad, but as in many things, it's one
Yes,
sad
sir,
thing.
sir. Sir, but unfortunately, we are heading towards them in our urban development. In case of Baroda also, the two dump yards, now the housing colonies are going nearer and nearer, and the dump yards are still working there. So it's a big worry that what
No,
can
it's
be
sad.
done.
It's sad, and I think it comes out of a callousness that we
Yes,
have
sir.
for the idea of life. So,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
tragic.
Yes.
There's one more question from a senior professor, Ashwin Mukul sir. He's asking, what is the role of COA in landscaping in today's education and profession?
Oh. Well, to be honest, I'm not very qualified to answer that. I mean, I don't know what. I don't even know what is the role of COA in architecture. So leave alone landscape. The way all these bodies are run, it's tragic as a professional body. So, and it's really tragic. The way professional bodies are run in our country, it's a joke. So, luckily, they don't have any role, I think, in landscape. But I don't know whether they actually do. I've stopped teaching for a long time. So, I've really lost touch with academics for some time now. And even when I did teach and even when I did academics, I was never too good at all this. In general, I have a very healthy disrespect for professional bodies in this country. The less one can do with them, the better. So yeah, no roles. They can have a role, but they're incapable of having one. That's all I'm saying. I'm sorry, I must have turned some red flags right now.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I don't know whether this was the kind of thing students needed to hear, but since you asked.
Okay, let's move ahead. There's another question from a student actually. When we tackle an administrative area, which is when we tackle an administrative area, which is housed inside a heritage fort precinct. What is the point we should follow to design an urban insert or maybe for the tourists?
You're asking me a studio professor question. This question really should be directed to your studio professor. But I mean, I'm not going to answer that question. But listen, there are fantastic examples. I mean, you just need to look at Carlos Carpa's work, and there are many. But I still continue to believe that after so many years, Carlos Carpa's work is still extremely, extremely distinctive about the way how do you intervene in historic fabric. So I think there are lots of case studies now in the world to look and study from them. The only thing that I will say this is that I think the French and to a certain extent the Italians, they have a nice way of looking at history. I mean, they see history as something that's an ongoing conversation. So it's only the French who could put in a glass pyramid in Louvre. I mean, imagine us trying to do something like that, I don't know, in some religious historical site in India. The country would have been thrown up in flames. The very fact that you can engage with history as is an ongoing conversation is in a way in which you can keep it alive for yourself and you don't fossilize it. And I think very often in India, we tend to fossilize history. We tend to sort of move away from it and say you can't touch it. But of course you can touch it. The question is, can you touch it with respect? Can you touch it with love? Can you give it a new life? And I think from an academic standpoint, everything is open for you. I mean, if tomorrow somebody asked you to redesign the inner spaces of the Taj Mahal into something, I don't think it's blasphemy. It is something that as academicians we must experiment with all the time. I mean, in reality, sure, the Taj Mahal should be left alone. But from an academic standpoint, we must learn to engage our. So there's a wonderful, I mean, I'm taking up too much time, but there's an exhibition that we have done which is called Tracing Narratives. It had come to Baroda also. And in that Tracing Narratives, we had started looking at a lot of the historical gardens in the country. So we looked at Nishad Bagh and, Aram Bagh and so on and so forth. And for all of them, I wrote an essay about why it means something to me today. So, I think unless we start talking about history in that sense, not because it's old. I mean, our grandfathers are old, but we don't love them because they're old. Right? We love them because of certain characteristics that they have, a certain space that they allow us, a certain memory that they build with us, a certain conversation. And I think buildings are the same, precincts are the same. I mean, unless you start developing your rapport, your conversation with them, or your meanings from them, you will never begin to enjoy history. So, otherwise, do whatever you want. I mean, the rest of it is fine. But yeah, that's the way I would look at it.
There is so many appreciation from the students and the faculties.
Thank you.
There's one question if you would like to answer.
Sure.
We have 4 or 5 questions, but I think we can take one only, and then we can move towards the vote of thanks. It's from the Janvi. Thank you, sir, for sharing your inspiring work. When architecture has been turning into capitalist good and design education tends to focus on the end product rather than the process, how should the profession and education move towards weaving all the subtle threads that make a holistic design?
So you said 2 things in that. I mean, you've used a political term, right? You've used capitalist, like it's a bad thing. I think that there's enough debate that's gone around in the world, and when you start talking about economic or political systems, you start looking at communism or you start looking at socialism. I think the world has concluded that the capitalist ways of creating resources is the only one that has been sustained. Now, there are different kinds of capitalism. There's a naked sort of capitalism, and there's a socialist capitalism, and within capitalism, there are many, many, many sort of subdivisions. So the European capitalism is a very gentle socialist capitalism. The American capitalism is a very naked money-making sort of capitalism. India is a confused capitalism. I mean, one doesn't know really what the hell we are up to. So do we want to be capitalist? Do we want to be socialist? I think we really don't know. So we're completely confused here, right? But so what is a political term that you use? And I think you have to be careful when you use these political terms. And I'm telling you why we should be careful. So first of all, if you look at the history of architecture, everything that we study as history of architecture is the product of a monarchy or a product of capitalism. That's the architecture that we study, right? And there's nothing wrong in that. There's nothing wrong with that. Does that mean that you don't care about cities or people? No, not at all. They're two different things, and one should not confuse ourselves into saying you have to be this or that. You can be both. You can be working with something that, as you call, capitalist, which really means somebody's got a lot of money and he wants to spend something, and you could be working for something which is an outreach activity, which is a city activity, an urban activity. I don't think architects should make those choices. Architects should say, give me a project and I'll do it. And give me a project and I'll do it with ethics. And I'll do it with passion. And I'll do it with love. And I'll do it with honesty. I'm not going to sit around saying, I will only do this kind of project or that. If it interests me, I want to do it. So I think that is what I think we should all be, because I'll tell you why. Too much conversation of late is trapped around this architecture for the public good, architecture of environmental consciousness, architecture of sustainability. And I'm saying all architecture should be for public good. Even when you start making an office building like ours, it should be for public good. I mean, sure, the people in Baroda, whoever owns it, they will enjoy it, but the city should also enjoy it, and the city should also find that certain value has gotten created for it. So everything should be for public good. Everything should be sustainable. Everything should be articulate. So remove all that and say, now what are we doing? And that, I think, requires skill. That requires very, very serious design skill. And very often, architects in this country are hiding behind these words when they don't have the skills for design. And I think we have to be careful about that. I can see that I've cheered some and angered some, but that's okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I think this calls for a round of applause from every one of us.
No. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you. Thank you. And after COVID, so we've just started, incidentally, a bunch of new projects in Baroda. And we started a very fascinating sort of project now, which is sorry, which one?
No, sir, there was some glitch, sound glitch.
No. So I mean, of course, we've done Arc and we've done Bridge House and we've done this house in the orchard, and we're just building one more house, which is like an exposed brick house. But we are now starting a rather beautiful project, which is next to the Uttarayan Art Village. And just the process of it and how we are beginning to map it, I think it's a lot of fun. So when this COVID gets over and we all get back to normal, one day I'd love to show your students the process on that project. It's fun.
Sure, sir.
Good. Thank you very much. Can I go, or is there something else?
Yes, sir. There's a formal vote of thanks by Jyoti ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You can.
Yeah. Thank you, Taha. Aniket sir, I had so much of things to written over here. I don't know where to start this vote of thanks, because it is something like never-ending process, and we have really learned quite a lot of things out of it. So myself, Professor Jyoti Gill, I'm Secretary IIA as well as Principal APID. On behalf of IA Baroda chapter and our collaboration Educational Institute APID and SVID, would like to give vote of thanks to you on this digital platform on celebration of World Architecture Day. Concisely, I'll try to say that you have really given a very beautiful, in simplistic manner, the whole journey of what we as an architect work relentlessly for 10 to 12 hours. So students get a glimpse, they have to accept that it needs that much slogging, even professionally also, because they think this is what they work when they're academically and professionally world is different. So that was the beautiful expression. That project of yours where the building from outside with cotton steel and then inside how the courtyard celebrates light was an excellent journey, because imageability, what you have from outside and what you see from inside, is what is a very good metaphor shown over here. As an architect, how we should really take an opportunity of storytelling through our project is the best thing we should really work on to. how landscaping and master planning has really helped us to go for ritualistic imaginability of the project, because the way you have shown those industrial projects, they never look like an industrial project, because the moment you talk about industrial project, there's a strong image which comes to our mind. So how to beat that image and yet make it very social. So that is another thing which I've really touched very well. So how value of habitat and conversation was engaged in the whole process, excellently done. So if I try to recapitulate what all things, it is another presentation maybe. I'll be going, I don't want to do that, but yes, it was beautifully touched. The purpose of the whole event was very well taken care of. So thank you very much from the behalf of all the students, all the fraternity members who are present over here, and would really like to hear again and again from you. And best part, what you are doing at LEAF, you'd like our students to get associated with you, is what we are looking forward to. So that with some kind of collaboration we can do over there, so the students get exposure right at academic level, so they envisage things beyond what they are doing just theoretically, is what we will look forward to. Thank you very much on behalf of everyone, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And since you're a principal, and the way you summarize my talk, I have to ask you, how many marks do I get?
It was not a jury. I was listening like a student, not like a principal.
Thank you. I'm just joking. And about LEAF, I mean, anytime, to be honest, anytime, we've just we're doing a lot of stuff with LEAF now. And I think, yeah, sure. So, I mean, if Taha writes us, or even if Parita writes us, I mean, whoever writes us, I think we'll figure out a way in which students can be exposed to research in LEAF and what LEAF is trying to do, and I think it's valuable. So, sure, happily.
Sure,
Sir, we'll definitely trouble you, sir.
Sorry?
We'll definitely trouble you.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Take care, guys. See you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.